Hey, everybody, welcome back. I'm super pumped about today's show. We talk about all kinds of cool things, not just usual UFOs and UAPs. We got into Bigfoots and cryptid and outer body experiences and astral projection. We went down the rabbit hole pretty good today with a man who's been doing this for 35 years. And you'd be surprised at how legitimate some of these experiences are. It's not as fringe as you might think. So today we're going down the rabbit hole. Are you ready, Jay?
Oh, I'm ready to do this. Let's do this.
Let's do this.
Are you paying attention?
Welcome back to another beautiful episode of UAP Studies Podcast. I am Louis Borges. Joining me, as always, my good friend and co-host, Jason Gilmet.
Hey, I'm happy to be here today. How you doing, Louis?
I'm doing really good. You like to always say any Sunday morning you wake up and you can chat about UAPs and aliens and paranormal things is a good day. So
Yeah, absolutely.
we're super excited about our guest today. He is an award-winning author. He's a MUFON field investigator, ghost hunter, paranormal researcher. He's written over 100 articles and 29 books. I mean, the wealth of information is huge. And we're really excited to chat with Mr. Preston Dennett. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, guys. Hi, Jason. Hi, Louis. Thanks for having me on the show. I'm excited.
Yeah, for sure. We like to pride ourselves on having big name people and reputable people. And you are, in fact, one of the bigger names as well in the field. So we're really happy to have you to continue our sort of discovery of this topic and talk to other people who've been doing it for a while and have some really interesting perspectives. So, but for those of our viewers that may not know who you are, maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and what got you into the whole world of ufology and where that's led to today.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I came into this field a complete skeptic. I really hated UFOs. I didn't like to talk about them. I just didn't believe. I thought people who saw UFOs were liars or on drugs or misperceiving. Kind of bought into the old Air Force, Project Blue Book explanations for this. Lies, hoaxes, hallucinations, misperceptions.
Swamp gas.
Yeah.
Exactly. That all changed when I was a pretty young man, 21 years old. It was 1986. I remember the exact date, actually. It's November 17.
Oh, really?
Yeah. There was a news report about a sighting over Alaska. You may have heard of the JLA Airlines sighting.
Yeah.
By Captain Kenju Torochi.
Yeah. You saw like a massive round mothership around this plane, right?
Right. Exactly. Tracked his plane for like an hour. He requested a course change. It still followed him. It was on radar. A big case. Of course, none of that was in the news report. It was very tongue-in-cheek, very brief, very jokey, and kind of just almost made fun of the subject.
Yeah.
But it interested me because I remembered my brother Mark, my older brother. I have 3 older brothers, an older sister and a younger sister. And Mark is unique among them. And he came into the house one day, I saw a UFO. And we all kind of just looked at him and rolled our eyes. I'm like, go away, shut up. I did, I should say. Found out later, my sisters both believed in UFOs. They've never seen them. But my other brothers were skeptical, but Mark said he'd seen one. So I approached him after seeing this news report. I'm like, Mark, tell me about that UFO you saw. He's like, I tried to tell you. You didn't want to hear about it. I'm like, well, tell me now.
Yeah.
And he described a really incredible sighting. He had basically, long story short, chased a UFO down the street, Reseda Boulevard in Southern California.
Wow.
And I'm like, wow, you're kidding. It's like, no, it was a metallic disc. It was treetop level. The whole sighting lasted about 20 minutes. He got very close to it with a couple of 100 feet.
Oh, wow.
And, and colored lights on it, silent. I'm like, Mark, really? Like, hey, if you don't believe me, talk to Phil, talk to Greg, which were his friends who were with him. I'm like, oh, you have other witnesses. I kind of thought everyone who saw a UFO, I don't know why, was alone. Turned out not to be true. So I did call them, and they just said the same thing. And so that I'm like, this is weird. I wonder if anyone else I know has seen a UFO. And so I asked everyone, well, not everyone initially, but started asking other people. Found out my sister-in-law, the wife of my other brother, Stephen. I asked her, she's like, oh yeah, I saw unexplained lights over Van Nuys Air Force Reserve Base. She described them. They were in a triangular formation, hovering pretty close. I'm like, really? She says, well, if you don't believe me, ask Adlai. That was her friend, who I also knew. So I called him up and he described the same thing in more detail, actually.
Wow.
That got the ball rolling. And boy, what a shock to find out that I had a couple of friends who had very close up sightings. One had missing time. And stupid me, I bring it up at work. And the lady whose desk was right next to mine, I worked as a, that time data entry and eventually bookkeeping, but she's like, oh yeah, me and my whole family watched this thing for an hour. I'm like, what do you mean? She said it was a star-like object. It would stop, it would dart, it was moving all over the sky. We all watched it. I'm like, let me talk to your daughter. Let me talk to her husband. Wouldn't talk to me.
I know.
He just didn't want to talk. I'm like, oh yeah, that's fine. But the daughter did, and she's like, well, I also had figures entering into my bedroom. I'm like, figures? And by this point, I picked up a few books, and she described grays, and actually talked about how she'd been taken on board a craft. She didn't really realize it. She just described, a small rounded room and being laid out on a table and examined. I'm like, well, what did these guys look like? She says, honestly, I can't really give you a great description because I didn't want to look at them. But she said they had large heads, dark eyes, pale skin, your typical grays.
Right.
Found out my other sister-in-law, or actually the same one who had a sighting, had seen grays as well. She told me like a year later. She's like, well, you might be interested to know I saw this. I'm like, why didn't you tell me? Yeah, so that was kind of my introduction. And that made me buy every darn book I could find. I was going to disprove them. I'm like, it's swamp gas, you guys. You know it is. Of course, it wasn't. It was not swamp gas. And found out a good quarter of the people I knew had had really dramatic encounters. I joined MUFON, became a field investigator, started going to all the groups. I subscribed to every UFO journal. Man, I'm still trying to get over it, honestly. 35 years later, I'm like, what is going on?
Yeah. You could try somebody and send them to jail if you have 2 witnesses, right? And the amount of witnesses and people, experiencers that are in the world should give the indication that this is a legit thing that's actually happening. And the stigma, like you explained, especially in the 80s when, you started all of this, the stigma was really out there. Like you could not talk about UFOs, people would laugh at you. So it's amazing that you started your career in the midst of one of the most difficult times to talk about UFOs.
Yeah, I got a lot of eye rolling, a lot of snickers. Some people were very skeptical. And I eventually did start going on the radio and stuff. They'd bring on debunkers and on TV occasionally.
Right.
And it was definitely different than it is today.
And would you say that you were more of somebody who wanted to debunk this and you became somebody who now investigates it and believes in what's happening? Or are you still on the more investigative side, more skeptical side?
Skeptical, I would say. I wouldn't say I was debunking, but finding out that this stuff was real just almost collapsed my belief system in a way.
Right.
Because I was so sure they weren't. I was very scientifically minded. I know from astronomy how far away the stars are. But there's just no way. And if ETs were real, they wouldn't look like us. They'd have tentacles and claws. They'd look like the Blob or something. These were all just false assumptions. And I really had to just step back and be very objective and let the facts speak for themselves. So I became much more interested in really getting at the truth and throwing away my prior beliefs. And because this wasn't taught in schools. And people, there was a cover up. I couldn't believe that my tax dollars were being used to cover up information. And that's demonstrable. That wasn't speculation. This is easily provable.
Right.
So in a weird way, it did make me more skeptical of things. And I really question people deeply when they report an encounter. And there's all kinds of ways, of course, you can vet a witness by, their emotional reaction and the little details that certainly weren't well known back then about what ETs look like and how they act and the interior of a UFO and so forth.
Right.
But yeah, I became obsessed, absolutely 100% obsessed. You should see the number of books I have on this subject. I filled up a room with them.
Were you, from the onset, a believer in the abduction phenomenon, or did you think that was some sort of psychological thing that the people talking to you about it were experiencing?
I wanted to believe that, but it was pretty clear from the beginning that wasn't the case.
Right.
Because, even back then, there was stories about implants, and some of the people I interviewed were missing. Their family was searching for them when they were having their encounter. They weren't in their rooms. So it was clear to me this wasn't psychological pretty much from the beginning. There's lots of cases involving, I guess we term physiological evidence, medical evidence. One of the first ladies I interviewed was a very extensive contactee, and she had been healed of a cyst. And I'm like, wow, really? She said, yeah, she was diagnosed with a cyst in her fallopian tubes, causing her all kinds of pain and bleeding and real problems. And she had the MRIs, which showed that it was there, and was going to have it removed. And the day before surgery, literally that night, she was visited, and she didn't really remember what happened, but she suspected that, it had to do with this cyst, and went to the doctor the next day, and they took the pre-op imaging and couldn't find her cyst. And they said, listen, you've had surgery. Which hospital did you go to? She's like, what are you talking about? Knowing, and they said, well, your cyst is gone. It's not there. And we know you had surgery because there's fluid here that's present only after someone has surgery. And she denied it. And I said, well, what are these little laser marks on your abdomen? Or what looked like that. And she's just like, I don't know. She played dumb. So that was one of the first cases I researched. She ended up actually showing me a UFO. She called it down for me.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was crazy. I was actually transcribing her interview, and she described how grays came around her bed and woke her up, scared the living daylights out of her. And she jumps out of bed and kicks one in the neck. And she said, I don't know. I think I may have killed it. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. She's like, no, I don't know, but I can tell you it scared the living daylights out of me. And I'd heard of a few cases like that. Like Travis Walton, he reached out and punched one of these guys.
Yeah, Calvin Parker too.
Yeah, right. So when she said that, I'm like, huh. And I did a whole interview with her, and I recorded it. And this was in 1994, about maybe 93. And I was in my condo in Canoga Park, third story, right? I'm transcribing the interview. I record all the interviews I do with people. And I got to that part where she's describing this incident. And I remember I'm leaning back in my chair thinking, is this lady for real? I know she believes it. And she's obviously sincere. She was very emotional when she described all this stuff. I'm leaning back in my chair thinking, I'm not sure if I can wrap my head around this. When I got an overpowering impulse to run onto the roof of the condo. And before I even knew it, I was doing that. I grabbed my glasses, which I use for driving pretty much exclusively. I'm slightly nearsighted. And I ran onto the roof of the condo. You're not allowed up there, by the way. But I went up there anyway, and thought, what am I doing? Why am I up here? And I wasn't up there more than 30 seconds, probably closer to 10 seconds, when a UFO appeared. Honest to God, right across the street. This is a densely populated area, but my condo overlooked the LA River there. And right across the street was some apartment buildings and palm trees. And there was this huge orange yellow light, kind of oval. And I can't tell you precisely how big it was, but it was big, 10 feet across, maybe a little more, right above the palm trees. And it blasted me with this message That's it's us. We're Wendy's ETs. That's not her real name. She doesn't want, but that was, and it wasn't words so much, but the message was clear. It's like, it's us. Look, you don't believe? Watch this.
Right.
And this darn thing starts darting back and forth fast. And it's totally silent. It's close enough where there's just no chance of misperception. And it went for about 30 seconds, 20, getting lower and lower till it was actually behind the palm trees. So I knew this thing was maybe 50 feet up in the air, tops.
Right.
And disappeared. And I'm like, oh my God. And I called her the next day because it was quite late. I'm like, you're not going to believe it. Your ETs showed up and told me, gave me this message, which was so weird for me because I'd heard people talk about, telepathic messages. I'd never experienced anything like that. And it was very clear. So I'm like, oh my God, this happened. And she's like, I told you I was telling the truth. I'm like, well, yeah, I know. I mean, I'm sorry. Not that I didn't believe you. It's just a lot.
So it's kind of scary because, I mean, they're obviously paying attention to who she's talking to if they're trying to convince you or convince you that, hey, it's actually us. So that means that they're watching, that they're paying attention, right? That's kind of freaky.
Freaked me out, I can tell you.
Yeah.
I told her, I'm like, I'd really like to have another, because she's like, well, I'm in telepathic contact with them all the time. I'm like, well, can you call them down? And she's like, well, maybe. I'm like, I want to see them. And she says, well, you just saw them. I'm like, but I wasn't ready. I didn't have a camera. I wasn't expecting it. And she's like, well, I'll see what I can do. And she calls me up a few days later. She's like, okay, they've agreed to come down for you. I'm like, really? Because I've done this with other witnesses. And I'd interviewed a lot of people by this point. And they said, oh, yeah, I can bring one. And they don't. It doesn't come. You're out there for an hour or two. And nothing happens. So I'm like, okay, let's do this. And she's like, okay. And we went off. I took my sister-in-law, who does a lot of the art for my books, and my nephew, her son, and Wendy, all four of us, went off the 210 freeway in Pasadena late one night. This was just a week or two later. And we climbed up we parked on the freeway. I'm like, oh, we're really not supposed to do this. She's like, well, this is where they said they would come. And it was this hill with a dirt fire break going up to the top. And we climbed up to the top. Me and Wendy got ahead of Christy and James, my sister-in-law and nephew. And we had just reached the top. And Wendy grabs my shoulders. She's screaming like, oh, look, and spins me around. And there's right 50 feet away is this huge object. Well, a sphere, a glowing sphere that was covered with scintillating golden lights. It was really pretty. And this thing was about as big as a house, a small house, a large room, hovering maybe 20 feet off the ground, 50 feet away, totally silent. And I mean, I don't even know how to describe it. It was huge. And just sitting there. And we're like jumping up and down and screaming. I could not take my eyes off of it. So I completely ignored the camera around my neck and just watched this thing with her. And it stayed there for a few seconds, 10 maybe, and then started moving very slowly and then zipped around the mountain. And it must have been 1,000 miles per hour because within 1 second, it was a couple of miles away. You could see it as a tiny little dot and then off it went.
Yeah, they tend to do that.
Yeah, it was really cool though. So that was one of my best sightings. And,
of all the different phenomenon that you've researched and written about, do you have a favorite, or is there anything that you find, what is your favorite area? Because there's so many things encompassed with it, especially now. It's not just nuts and bolts UFOs. It's cryptids and orbs and, poltergeists. And, the deeper you go down the rabbit hole, the more obscure this is becoming. So of all the things in this field, what are some of your favorite either concepts or just, what is your brain chewing on right now with 35 years into this?
All of it. Yeah, you're so right. There's layers and layers to this. And very early on, people started reporting, well, I had a near-death experience, or, my house is haunted. We had a good family friend who claimed to have levitated as a child.
Oh,
I'm like,
wow.
Mary, you're kidding me. She's like, no, I flew. No one believes me. And so I realized early on that there was a lot of stuff going on that to some degree it's connected to all of this. And at the same time as I started researching UFOs, I started experiencing a lot of stuff myself, because I wasn't enough for me to just interview people or read about it. Like, hey, if you're seeing a UFO, I want to see one. So I was out in the fields looking for them, and I did. I saw them. And if someone reported ghosts, I'm like, I'm coming over. I want to experience this. And I did. I was able to start to experience a wide variety of stuff. And at some point, Bigfoot reared its ugly head. I'd avoided researching Bigfoot for a while, honestly, because I thought it might be real. And I didn't really want to open up that can of worms. But when I got my first Bigfoot case, I'm like, fine, let's look into Bigfoot. And found out, of course, that was real. So yeah, I've researched all aspects of the paranormal. I think probably my favorite is out-of-body experiences, because that was something you could research subjectively, personally. I read a book by Robert Monroe, who's a really famous out-of-body guy. It was called Journeys Out of the Body, and Far Journeys, and then The Ultimate Journey. He wrote 3 books. And in his first book, he gave exercises on how to do it. And by this point, my sister-in-law had described her out-of-body experience, and a couple of other people. I'm like, well, this is something I can try. And I did the exercises, and it worked. I ended up writing a whole book about my own experiences with it, because after I had one, I'm like, oh, I want to do that again. and I did.
It didn't freak you out?
Oh, yeah, sure did. It was really very cool, though. I mean, it was a little scary at first. There was a couple of experiences that were just really, I thought I died, honestly.
So and let's talk about that, because a lot of people think of these as near-death experiences where you have something outer body happen, but the two can be separate. Like, you don't have to almost die or, drown for 40 seconds, have an outer body experience, and then get brought back. So what, from what what is an actual out of body, or this phenomenon that happens with near-death experiences? Like, what is it? Is it a conscious realm? Are you actually detaching physically from your flesh? Like, maybe elaborate a little bit on that for those of us. I mean, I'm super into it, and I'd like to know more. So I'm genuinely asking, tell me about outer body experiences.
Yeah, by that point I had read Raymond Moody's books on near-death experiences and loved them. So I bought every book on near-death experiences I could find and was interviewing people. And also all the astral travel books, the out-of-body books.
Yeah.
And they are essentially the same thing. The only difference is a near-death experience is forced and follows a very set pattern, and is caused by trauma, whereas the out-of-body experience is sort of an intentional event that you can foster and cultivate and do yourself through meditation, and is more open-ended. So you can, because in the near-death experiences, usually people will reach a border and they're not allowed into the higher realms and are forced back. Whereas with the out-of-body experiences, it's completely up to you how far you want to take it.
Oh, wow.
And for me, the first experience I had was just lying down, and I'd been doing the exercises, which are basically just relaxation and visualization type things. And you're supposed to reach what's called the vibratory state, which, is when your body starts to vibrate intensely.
Yeah, your third eye opens, right? Your pineal gland.
Yeah, and Robert Monroe described it as, it's a mild electric shock. And when I did it, I thought I was being electrocuted. I thought I'd stuck my finger in the light socket next to my bed. That's what I was rationalizing. I'm like, what's happening to me? Oh my God. Because my whole body was shaking like a rattlesnake. And it was loud and very physical feeling. And then pop, I popped right out, and I'm floating across my room out of control, right across the hallway and into the bathroom. And I kind of oriented myself, and I looked in the mirror. I'm like, oh my God, I'm out of body. if this is real, there's life after death. All at once, you just know. I mean, all it takes is one real OBE, and and I got pulled right back into my body. Did it again the next weekend. The third time, I thought I had died. I woke up already out of body and looked down on my bed, and I saw myself lying there. I thought, oh, I'm dead. This is horrifying. I dived right back in and I woke up. I'm like, oh, yay, I did it again. So I really buckled down and did the exercises and started having them pretty much every weekend. But I'd try to pop out and be like, yeah, I'm out. And whoosh, right back in. So it took me a year to basically just calm down, see if you can stay out more than 3 seconds. Honestly, it took me a full year of that. And I extended it to a minute and then 2 minutes and then 15 and got really good at it. Could walk through walls and visit places in the neighborhood and other people, and extended that more and more. And at some point got my mom, who had passed away some years earlier, appeared and pulled me over to the other side and gave me a tour of what I guess I would call the heavenly realms. I'm not religious really at all,
right?
But it's a good way of describing it because they're beautiful there. Very pastoral, and everything's glowing and sparkling with light and love, and there are people and trees and gardens and flowers and brooks, and great. So that's how it all began. And since then, I've had all kinds. Oh, I mean, it's amazing the stuff you can do.
Right.
You can learn about past lives, visit healing temples, go to the Akashic Library, talk to enlightened beings, enlightened masters, that sort of thing. Visit all your deceased loved ones. It's wild. I mean, I can't recommend it enough.
Was there a silver cord? Because I keep hearing about the silver cord that's attached to your body to your, soul or consciousness once you're out of body. Did you see that at all?
No,
No,
I didn't. Not initially. And people always had like a spirit guide with them. I'm like, well, what the heck? I'm alone out here. Where's my spirit guide? And I did eventually, meet up with some of them. And I'm like, well, how come I'm not seeing the silver cord? And I started looking back through the books and I'm like, well, look behind you. And I wouldn't see it until one day I did. I woke up, I'm like, oh, I'm out of body again. I'm floating above my bed. And what is this? That's all wrapped around me. It was a fire hose. And I'm looking at it and I'm holding it. I'm like, well, this is weird. And then it dawned on me like, oh, this is the cord. And later when I got much better at it, because that was early, right? And it's disorienting and it's a new state of consciousness, which is somewhat delicate. Right. And it's easy to fall back into a dream or just forget. But after I got better at it, I woke up one day, or I was able to just go out of body, you kind of induce it, right? And I popped out and I'm wandering around in my living room. I'm like, oh, let's see if I can find my silver cord. I did. And it was coming out of my abdomen at that point. It comes out of different places, sometimes your head or your back or wherever. But I felt it. I'm like, oh, and I was feeling it. And it made up all these tiny little filaments. And I'm like, wow, this is amazing. And they're all kind of energetic. Yeah, the silver cord, some people see it, some people don't. I generally don't.
Right.
I did all kinds of experiments. Like someone asked me, are you wearing clothes? I'm like, I never actually checked. And I'm like, I'm gonna have to check that out. Popped out one day and I'm like looking, I'm like, oh shoot, I'm dressed up for work. I have shoes, my dress shirt is on. I'm like, all right, I dress up for my out of body experiences.
Nice.
At least in that one.
Right? Yeah.
I ended up undressing too because I wanted to see. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm normal. My hair comes back. Long
really?
hair.
Oh, really? So, like, can you see yourself, like your reflection in the mirror?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
You can, if you want.
Okay.
You can do it. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. But yeah, you absolutely can. And I used to work out a lot when I was a young man because I was pretty skinny. I'm like, I need to bulk up a little bit. And when I pop out of body, I'm like, oof, you should see me. I'm like, damn, I look good.
Looking good. Yeah.
We interviewed a lady last week, and she's basically practicing that QHHT, quantum healing hypnosis technique. So essentially, instead of being like a meditative master and getting into those realms and really, you know, sort of like the Buddhist monks are trying to do, there's a meditative way, or no, sorry, there's a hypnotic way that you can be induced into that deep trance and have that same past life regression, maybe help deal with traumatic events, UFO abduction type things, people that are kind of fuzzy on the topic. But I thought it was very interesting that it's so inherently possible that even if you can't get there on your own studies, you could just be put into that state and still reap the same benefit. And I thought that was very encouraging, that it's not that far out of everybody's grasp. It's possible, and it's a practice, and this is something very attainable. It's not just kind of a weird idea. I genuinely believe that we can all access this and improve our lives as a result.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to see a UFO, you can. You go out to UFO hotspots, wave areas, hanging out with someone who's having encounters. If you want to see a ghost, there are places you can go. And same, that's what I like about the out-of-body thing. It's easy access to the paranormal. Anyone can do it. It's a steep learning curve for some people, but others do it and boom, first night, they have their OBE. It took me about 2 months, of really a month and a half, doing the exercises. And it worked, and I was thrilled. And yeah, seeing a UFO for the first time was amazing. It happened in 92, actually, about 6 years into my research. And I was driving home one day after talking to Mark and Christy, who were, you know, she encountered blue beings when she was a little girl. And Mark, of course, had seen a UFO. And so they were helping me through this because I was a wreck. I was having a hard time adjusting to all of this a little bit. And had left their home late one evening. I'm like, I got to go, you know, I've got to work. And was driving the 5 miles to my home in Canoga Park. They lived in Woodland Hills. It was late at night, July 1992, and I just left their house. I was maybe 2 to 3 minutes away from their house, coming around this tiny little street, hairpin corner, at maybe a few miles an hour. You know, it's a steep little hill, so you can't really drive fast at all. And I saw this light swooping down towards my car. My first thought was, that's a bird coming towards me. And looking up at it, I could see it was not a bird. It was a round ball of light. And I thought, well, it's a firecracker. You know, it's late July, and this is just where my mind is going. And it comes right down in front of my windshield. And I'm like, well, that's not a firecracker. That is an orb. And I'm staring at this thing thinking, is that a reflection? You know, this is not a reflection. It was about the size of a golf ball, kind of bright yellow, white, and very solid, looking at me. I mean, you could sense intelligence in this thing. It was behaving intelligent. It was right there looking at me, a foot, 2 feet away. Moved back and forth in front of my windshield 2 or 3 times, stops again, looking at me. I'm like, oh, holy cow.
And are you driving at this point?
I'd stopped.
Oh, you
in
stopped,
my car,
okay.
gripping the steering wheel, looking at this thing, going, what is going on? And this thing dips down. It's right over the hood of my car, right? Dips down, it almost touches the cement and goes straight up. And really the last thing I remember is leaning over my windshield and looking up at this thing, goes straight up through the canopy of trees. And that's where it got weird. I'd always tell people, well, that's my sighting. And some years later, someone said, well, what happened next? And I'm like, I don't remember driving home. I forgot about the whole darn thing. I didn't remember seeing that for a couple of months. And I'd interviewed people like, oh, I forgot about the UFO that landed in front of my car. I'm like, how can you forget about something like that?
Right.
But this is, you know, missing time. It's that aspect, and it happened to me, and I get it now. So I think that as soon as I started investigating this stuff, they're like, oh, here's a guy. Let's check him out. Because I started looking it up. I'm like, well, a lot of researchers who've gotten into this start investigating it, and then it'll investigate you.
Have Yeah, I've
George Knapp said
heard that
that too
before.
about Skinwalker Ranch. You go there with a nuts and bolts mentality. Next thing you know, it's cryptids and light orbs, and you're getting the hitchhiker effect, taking it home. Your family seeing stuff. Like, blew his mind too, and he's been studying this shit for 30 years.
Yeah, I think it's cool. And
Yep.
people, there's a lot of fear surrounding the subject, and people are like, I'm not so sure this is good for us, for humanity. And I kind of bought into that initially because I'm like, wow, people are being kidnapped. They did not ask for this. And they're being physically examined. And who are these guys? And what are they doing to us? And I pretty quickly realized that the fear surrounding the subject is not warranted and that they're not trying to hurt us. And when someone sees grays in their bedroom, for example, first thing they will say almost always is, don't be afraid. Have no fear. No harm will come to you. We are not here to hurt you. That's the most common phrase people hear. And they still have a strong fear reaction often. But when they're actually taken on board, the scariest thing that actually happens is they're physically examined. Some people are fighting it the whole way, but some aren't. And they have really positive experiences. And I think it was Thomas Bullard, the folklorist and UFO researcher, who was the first to statistically study what happens when people are taken on board. And he outlined it very clearly. They're physically examined, they're taken to the engine room, they're taken to the control room or the observation deck, they're given messages. And that's absolutely true. This is exactly what I found in my research. And my first book was UFO Healings, which was, basically inspired by Wendy's experience. I'm like, because I know of a case of 2 police officers who were healed of one of them had a flesh wound, a little bite from a baby alligator on his finger, and he was healed by a beam of light. There was a Peruvian customs official who was struck by a beam of light that healed him of nearsightedness and rheumatism. Jacques Vallée had a case of a medical doctor who was cured of an axe wound on his foot and partial paralysis. So I started looking up these cases. I'm like, oh my gosh, every major researcher out there, almost without exception, has these cases, including David Jacobs and John Mack and Bud Hopkins, and Philip Mantle, Michael Hesseman, Edith Fiore, Barbara Lamb, Yvonne Smith. I could go on. They all have these cases. No one was talking about them. I think it's because fear sells and the media loves the lurid, scary story. And these accounts were being pushed to the fringe and not studied, not given the attention they deserved, and changed the way I feel about this phenomena. They're not here to hurt us. It's the opposite, actually. I know people do have traumatic encounters. I'm not going to deny that, but I always ask them, what actually happened to you? And nobody describes what I would call sadistic behavior.
Right.
Where ETs are going, I'm going to hurt you. It's just not there. That is not their agenda at all.
Well, even Terry Lovelace, when he said he was on board of the craft, and the doctor, whoever it is, the main examiner that was doing the exam, he was screaming on the table like crazy, and the examiner sort of looked at him and telepathically told him, "Oh, be quiet. We always put you back." That's funny, right? Like, it's like, okay, well, at least their intention is good, and they bring you back to your, at least close to where they took you. So yeah, I don't think there's no malice, there's no intent, no evil intent behind this. It seems to be something like they need us or we need them, and they're here to help us, or it could be a mix of the two. But it is a weird experience, and the more that we interview people, the more that we sort of grow in our thinking and expand what we used to not really believe in. Now we're like, well, now we have to look at it, right? Because it's being brought up by investigators like yourself. You're mentioning the Bigfoot. I'm the same. I was like, no, Bigfoot doesn't exist. But the more I talk to other investigators, researchers like yourselves, it seems to be that, yeah, I should probably look into the Bigfoot stuff as well. Maybe Louis and I can have
Well, we live in the Pacific Northwest, right?
Right?
This is Bigfoot land here in like the Appalachians, but I believe it's real. I struggle with the idea that maybe it's interdimensional. I think it's actual flesh and blood. I think it's a species. I think it's like what is it, a Gigantopithecus or some actual classification of giant ape that's maybe just smart enough to know to stay away from us because we're going to shoot you. We're dangerous, right? I don't, but some people are saying it's more cryptid than actual flesh and blood. So I believe I just don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either, because there are cases you can march out which do have paranormal aspects to them.
Yeah.
My first Bigfoot case involved a radiologist by the name of Robert Murphy, who had a Bigfoot encounter the day after a UFO landed in his backyard. So he felt a connection there. And he said, I was telepathically in communication with the Bigfoot. What? And after researching Bigfoot, I'm like, there's a lot of cases where people claim that. And there is a paranormal aspect to it. But these things leave footprints and air samples. It's clear that they are, I think that they are flesh and blood, but that doesn't necessarily preclude them from having, what we would call supernatural abilities.
Yeah.
I did interview one guy who said he saw one appear in front of him and then disappear, and not by moving away, but turning invisible, and telepathically told him that they have this ability. And I thought, gosh, is this guy, this is, really? He's like, no, seriously, this is what happened to me. I'm like, okay. And I was really starting to dig into all the books on this phenomena. And there does seem to be two schools of thought. And it wouldn't surprise me a bit if, that there are different types. We see that, with the really tall Sasquatch up in Northern California, and the skunk ape of Florida, and they're called different things in every culture. Yowies in Australia, and
Yeti,
exactly.
Abominable snowman.
There's a lot of stuff that it's just not reaching mainstream, scientific study.
I spoke to a native elder once. I used to sell cars for this company that would do sort of like big tent sales. They would go to a town and there'd be like 400 cars at a big mall or something like that. And it was in northern British Columbia, Canada. It was a native family they were the royalty of their tribe. And like where they came from, there was no roads. That's how deep they had come. And they were in like proper dress and everything else, really interesting people. And I was chatting with the older man, the elder, because it was his granddaughter who bought the car. So I was chatting with him and I said, hey, like you're way in the woods. Like, you ever see Bigfoot? And I just thought I'd throw it out there. And he goes, I never saw one, but you can smell them. And we see their hair stuck on the trees sometimes. And I'm just like, holy shit, he's not kidding. Like, I asked it just as a joke, like, hey, you're in Bigfoot country. He's like, yeah, we don't see them. We can smell them. So I wholeheartedly believe this guy had no reason to lie to me. He wasn't like an iPhone carrying individual. These people still respected a very ancient way of living. They hunted and lived off the land and everything else. He wouldn't do that just to mess with me. So from that day on, it kind of changed my belief that, there is something to it. They do exist. Yeah,
actually, I did have my own encounter once. That same lady, Wendy, the contactee, moved out to the edge of the national forest in Acton, and the LA National Forest is fairly large. And I found out it does have a long history of Bigfoot encounters. But she calls me up one day, like, oh, Bigfoot showed up. I'm like, oh, really? She's like, honest to God, talk to my roommate, talk to my son. They saw it looking in the window. And I went over there and talked to them. They were all very sincere. There was footprints. They weren't super conclusive or anything, but there was something there. She's like, it went into this tree and there was a big branch broken. And so she's describing all of this and she says, it's talking to me. She says, I think it likes me. They don't kidnap anyone ever, do they? I said, oh no, that never happens. And started doing research and found out, well, actually there are, a half dozen cases or more of people who have allegedly been kidnapped by them. And certainly there's Native American stories about that as well. Yeah. So I called her up. I'm like, well, that does happen, but I wouldn't worry about it. It's pretty rare.
You should be fine.
But I ended up going up there. She's like, I think I know where this thing is coming from. She lived right on the edge of the forest. I'm like, well, let's go there. Let's check this out. And we brought all kinds of equipment, right? Cameras and sound equipment. And it was dusk, and we went out there on this dirt road out into the forest. And it was really steep ravines and very harsh terrain, just a few miles from our house, which was a few miles off the freeway. So it's not like super far into the wilderness, but deep enough. And no sooner had we pulled over, she gets out of the car. I drove, and she's going into the back seat to pull out the equipment. And I open the door and I walk up to the front of the car. She's like, it's in that ravine. And I'm looking at this ravine, which is super steep and you could not possibly climb it. It's just super thick with brush, right? So I walk up to the edge of it and I'm looking at it. And suddenly I hear this roar, really loud. And I thought, what the heck? And I look up thinking, is there a plane overhead buzzing me? Of course, there wasn't. But it reminded me of a time I had gone to the zoo and had a lion. Yeah, it was a lion roar right next to me. I was right next to the lion when it roared. And I don't know if you've ever had that experience, but
yeah, you feel it in your chest.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's what it felt like. And the first time I'm like, oh my God, because it roared for a good 10 seconds, which is long. You don't, what the heck? And I'm looking around trying to triangulate it, pinpoint it. And she's freaking out. She's like screaming. And it roars again. And this time I know I can tell because you can sort of see, you know what I mean? You can pinpoint the sound. And this thing was just a couple 100 yards away, I'm guessing. And I'm running towards it. She's like, what are you doing? Get in the car. We're leaving. I'm like, oh, shoot. She says it roared 3 times. I'm pretty sure it was twice. Maybe she's right because it was quite surprising. But she made me get back in the car. She was absolutely hysterical. And I reluctantly left. But I'm absolutely convinced that wasn't a bear. We had cougar growing up where I was in Topanga Canyon. We had a guy who had pet cougars for the Mercury Lincoln commercials. He kept them in cages and we'd hear them roaring all the time. I know it wasn't that. And I don't know what it was. If it wasn't a Bigfoot, I can't say for sure, but I can tell you it wasn't a bear, it wasn't a lion, wasn't a cougar. I don't know. It was cool. But I wanted to stay there, but she made me leave.
And you were there trying to find a Bigfoot. So you had previous belief that this was a hot spot with a good chance. So you were already looking for that.
Yeah. And I looked it up and there were actual accounts in that area, stretching throughout history.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just resting on her eyewitness testimony. And she gave all kinds of details that she couldn't possibly have known unless she was reading UFO books. And I searched her house. Like just, as an investigator, you're very nosy. And she had not read anything on Bigfoot. And she was describing how they, she says it would scream like a woman being murdered in the wash. And I'm like, yeah, they do that. She says, one time it came and put a boulder on top of my roof. I'm like, yeah, they're all about rock throwing and this sort of thing. She says it took 2-3 guys to go up on her roof and pull this boulder off.
I like the trees upside down. They haven't been cut down. They've been like torn out. Roots are still intact, then flipped or inverted, and then slammed back into the ground upside down with the roots in the air. Like the amount of muscle power you would need to do that as a biological creature is immense. Well, can't imagine.
Just imagine the chimpanzee, like how strong they are.
Oh yeah,
they're smaller than us, but they are freakishly strong.
Yeah.
So you think about if you have something that's even bigger than that, like Sasquatch or Bigfoot, the strength of these things must be immense. Like they could just tear you apart like that if they wanted to, right? Like, that's the scary bit.
It's 100% real. If people don't believe in it, they have not done their homework.
Right.
I don't mean to be rude, but the evidence is there for those who are willing to, examine it.
Yeah. I need to explore it more because I've been on the fence, like I said, with the whole Bigfoot thing, but And the more I talk to people, the more I'm starting to understand that maybe I should look at it as well. That's another part of ufology, I guess, another branch off ufology that we need to explore more as well. Have you had any cases, let's say, of abductions or close encounters that are your favorite?
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, there's a whole long list of them. One guy really impressed me, Kevin Kamin. He's a Navy medic, and I interviewed him. He approached me after I'd spoken down in San Diego. I was talking about praying mantis ETs, and shown some images. He's like, "Well, I saw one of those, and didn't quite look like that, but you were close," and described a very interesting encounter, which he remembered in waking consciousness, without hypnosis, which I think does work, but I've shied away from it just because of the controversies surrounding it, and false memory syndrome, and all that. I support it. I think it's a valid tool, but just in the interests of my own research, I can tell people absolutely 100%, my cases do not rely on hypnotic regression for the most part. And his certainly didn't. He described a very intense encounter where he was taken on board and saw 3 praying mantis ETs, which he said were 15 feet tall. And I'm like, wow, that's pretty tall, Kevin. Because most of them I heard were like 9 feet tall. And he's like, well, listen, one of them came right up to me and grabbed my shoulder. I was looking up at it. It was more than twice my height. I'm 6 foot 2 inches, almost 3. And this was 15 feet tall, I'm telling you. It was like looking up at a basketball hoop, about basketball thing is how he described it. Bone white, really thin, stick-like limbs, claw-like hands, eyes the size of basketballs. One eyeball was bigger than his head, he said. Wow. And he ended up having a long conversation with these things. Scared the living daylights out of him, even though it was really a benevolent encounter. That's a favorite. Probably my most favorite is the subject of my latest book, which is called Symmetry, a True UFO Adventure. It's about this lady by the name of Dolly Safran. And she contacted me looking for someone to tell her story. And after vetting her, and she had photographs, she had corroborating witnesses, medical evidence. I mean, she had a lot of stuff to back up her story. And she is what I would call a fully conscious contactee. You may have heard of Jim Sparks. He's pretty well known for not using hypnosis to recall his encounters. And that's true with Dolly too. She describes a lifetime of encounters, and it's easily the most extensive case of anyone I've ever interviewed, or really even read about for that matter. But she described how she was taken up and they're like, would you like to work with us? Grays, right? And she says, yes, I would love that. And I said, well, what do you want to do? There's all these opportunities. What do you want to do with your life? We can assist you with that. And this is something other people have told me. She's like, well, I'd love to learn how to fly your craft. I said, okay, get in the seat. And basically she was 14 years old when she had this fully waking encounter. And they sat her down and took her off to see the planet Saturn. And when she said that, I'm like, oh, this is exactly what Jay Gardner, a man I had interviewed just shortly before that, described. He was 12 years old when they did that to him. Gave him that opportunity, sat him down, and he flew the craft. And I've talked to other people who, said that they were taught how to fly the craft. So here's Dolly describing it in much greater detail.
Did they use their consciousness, Preston, for their for flying the craft? Was it a consciousness thing, or was there an actual mechanical aspect to it?
Consciousness primarily. I mean, they handed her this little wand-like device and said, this will hook up to you mentally, and you will be able to use this. And we'll give you the coordinates, and off they went. And I know how this must sound to a skeptic, like, what? They took you to Saturn? Again, I have another case. Ray Fowler of Betty Andreasson fame also had the same darn experience when he was a kid. Leo Sprinkle as well, and others. And to hear, other people telling me, yes, they sat down and I mentally flew this craft. And Dolly described it in great detail, being, having no fear of her encounters and being fully awake. She was able to give more information about this. And she says, that all the craft are conscious. I'm like, what do you mean? She says, all of them, they are indwelt by a being that flies the craft and connects up to it. And I have to tell you, many people have told me that, but couldn't quite figure it out. Like, I felt like this thing was alive. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, I don't know. I just felt like it was. And Dolly was able to say, oh yeah, there's an entity who dwells it. And she gave all kinds of detail. There's, I really focused on that aspect in the book because I thought it was so interesting.
Well, we talked about that. Sorry, I think your volume is a little too high there, Preston. It's getting a bit of feedback.
All right, sorry. Is that better?
It's a new mic. You're still working it out.
I can turn it down if you want.
No, the mic is perfect. It was
the
just
mic's good. I think
the
it's just
feedback from our from us to the mic. But no, we were talking about how even listening to the Navy, their recent incident with like the Tic Tac in 2004, how these things fly is consciousness. Like they're aware. Like he said that what was it, Captain Fravor, David Fravor, I think. He mentioned when he was going down in a loop to approach this thing, it turned around as if it like consciously knew that he was coming down towards it, and then it started circling around him, and they were doing this sort of dance in the sky until it took off. But it takes off at the speed of thought. That's why they're so freaking fast. It's just a thought. I want to be over there. You're there, right? And that's what's amazing about this. But we often would explore that, like where these things operated consciously. And you just mentioned that you've had tons of people tell you, yes, these are operated consciously. So consciousness seems to keep reoccurring as a theme. Whenever we interview people, they keep talking about consciousness. So there's validity there to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really interesting because if you look into the whistleblower accounts of crash retrievals and reverse engineering, and supposedly we do have these craft secreted at places like Area 51 and Wright-Patterson, Edwards and Norton and Air Force Base and so forth.
Yeah.
Right. Well, let's face it, there's a lot more out there than just Roswell.
Yeah.
But according to the eyewitness reports, the whistleblower reports, they've gone inside some of these things. I'm like, well, where's the controls? How do they operate?
Lazar said that too.
Right.
No control surfaces. It's just all smooth. Looked like one piece, like it was 3D printed somehow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I interviewed a guy in Utah, Don Anderson is his name. He's also woke up to his experiences and didn't need hypnosis. He tried it, but now remembers it consciously. And he saw Bob Lazar's drawings. And he says, oh, that's exactly the kind of craft I was on. I know Bob Lazar is telling me the truth. There's no way he could have made this up. So that's exactly what I was on board.
Yeah.
And,
we're strong Bob Lazar fans. Yeah,
we believe his story for sure. Maybe he embellished his educational record for resume purposes. I mean, I think everybody does nowadays, or always has, right? But I think he knows too much. And the whole element 115 thing, how do you predict an element that's 20 years away, and that the properties would suit that type of a nuclear engine sort of thing? I think it's just too coincidental. He gets a lot of heat, but we're big proponents of Bob Lazar.
Yeah, and what he said is certainly not unique. There's a lot of whistleblowers saying the same darn thing. He's not the only guy talking about, Area 51.
Yeah.
And George Knapp and Linda Moulton Howe and Bill Hamilton III, and a bunch of researchers have first-hand reports from people saying the same darn thing Bob Lazar says. I believe he's telling the truth as well. Dolly Saffron says, oh yeah, he's telling the truth. He said things that she knows, in terms of how these craft are flown and the power sources. She says, oh yeah, he's legit.
And even it was a sports model is what he describes that. I think Joe Rogan has a model of it on his desk now. I think somebody made it for him or whatever. So he has it right there whenever he watches that program. But yeah, no, and the thing is, there was no operation room or no physical examination room in that craft. It seemed to just be like just a scouting thing. I think you mentioned there was just like 3 seats or something like that in it. But most people, when they are aboard a craft, always describe a medical room, which to me means that these crafts, whatever they are designed to come here to do medical procedures, because why would they build crafts that have those rooms in them, right? And all the tools that they use are designed to work on us by the looks of it, right? Like the needles and the whatever it is that they do to people, even the implants. So their interest is in us. And like you mentioned, they don't show any threat towards us, but yet we know that we're of interest to them. And that's a fascinating part of this whole thing, is that, you know, it's not like investigating ghosts, you know, because ghosts could just be there because of they're stuck there. In this case, it's like they're here for a reason. And that's the part that fascinates me. It's like, what's that reason? Like, why is it us? Is it us, or is it a bigger plan out there? Have you come up with any theories or anything like that at this point, being into this for like 35 years?
Oh, I think we have a pretty good handle on their agenda and why they're here. Researchers like Barbara Lamb and John Mack and Dolores Cannon, all these guys, their research is very much matching up with what I found. I think it's clear they are very interested in us,
right,
and examining us. And the hybrid baby phenomena is one of their agendas. People certainly asked about that. I interviewed a lady from, well, she lived in California and the East Coast. She asked them flat out, like, why? And why are you taking me? They said, we are using your genetics to reinvigorate ours, which have become damaged due to space travel and radiation exposure and intervention or manipulation. They've lost the ability to reproduce, that they are basically reinvigorating their genetic stock. And she said, are you planning on taking over our planet? And they said, no, your planet is far too crowded. There are many Earth-like planets out there. We have zero interest in, you guys are far too violent. We have no interest in that. But they definitely do seem to be very interested in our genetics and that sort of thing. I think there's multiple agendas. They are very much interested in, I'd say, trying to wake people up. Because if anyone gets a message beyond, don't be afraid, we won't hurt you, it will be a warning of some kind, usually against nuclear proliferation or use of nuclear materials or warlike ways, greed and corruption, or environmental destruction. One lady I interviewed in Maine, she had a long talk with her adult hybrid son. Said, we're always watching over you. You should know that the greed and corruption is choking your society. And if you continue down that path, you're going to destroy your society like we did our own. They said, we've been working with humans for millennia, upgrading their genetics. And not only humans, but animals, specifically dogs and cats, they told her, to make them more emotionally compatible to humans. I thought that was really interesting because, everyone loves their dogs and cats. They are so human-like in so many ways.
They are.
She said they told her Hurricane Katrina was nothing compared to what's coming, which turned out to be true. They told her there's a large earthquake fault running down the center of the United States that at one point will probably be triggered. They said if people should start disappearing from this planet, it's being done by us for the greater good. And now we have all these reports of the missing 411 phenomena, people just disappearing. So these are their agendas, warning us. Another is to wake us up. I guess the best way to put it would be psychically or spiritually. And almost without exception, contactees, people who have regular contact, are profoundly psychic. And it's not unusual for them to say that they have, healing abilities, doing hands-on healing or mediumship or astral travel or precognition or levitation even. Whitley Strieber claimed to have levitated. I thought, wow, that's interesting, because so did Stephen Greer. I thought, wait a second, Jacques Vallée had that case. Same guy who was healed had spontaneously levitated twice following his encounter. I ended up asking Dolly, I'm like, I don't suppose you've ever had a levitation experience. And she kind of looked at me and smiled. She's like, well, yeah, I wasn't going to tell you. But yeah, I've had that happen at least 3 times. I'm like, really? Tell me about it. So I ended up doing a whole study on that, and I found a bunch of, contactees who have reported physical levitation. This fits in. They are waking people up to our own, I won't even call them supernatural or superhuman abilities. They're natural. We have these abilities to, recall past lives. This is a huge part of contact. There's a spiritual aspect that is not talked about by the nuts and bolts folks. I know I talked to a lady who was interviewed by Bud Hopkins, hypnotized, and she says that he absolutely did not write about the spiritual aspects of her encounter. Probably because he didn't want, it's a lot to swallow. It's a big pill to swallow when you're talking about not only being contacted by aliens, but levitation and going through walls and telepathy and precognition and healing and channeling and psychic reading.
It opens up a box of possibilities and abilities for these people after this contact. And one could almost ask, do you think it's because they're open to these experiences that they're having the abduction phenomenon, or is the abduction phenomenon opening up these different experiences?
Yeah, I think it goes both ways.
Right.
Absolutely. Because I know there are people who have not, had a lifetime of psychic experiences until they had contact. And other people who are, do have all kinds of stuff going on from childhood on and then have contact.
Right.
So I think it probably goes both ways, but I can tell you with that lady in Maine, they told her, this is our gift to you for what you have given to us. And there was another lady from Louisiana, and they said, this is our gift to you. Same words. And there was another lady I interviewed, Pat Brown is her name. She's a telephone operator. She went to see a channeler in Sedona one day. Her friend's like, let's go see the channelers. And she had no interest. And her friend just begged and begged. So they go to see this channeler. And the channeler is like, I'm this guy from a planet Crouton or whatever.
Yeah, I like that.
She's like, you're an alien, huh? And she described going to see this channeler. And this channeler said, I am, a gray and from the, and she's like, I'd like to see your ships. And they said, okay, we will arrange it. And she started having visitations. And it was very scary for her. She did not like it at all. She said it was terrifying.
Right.
And just got to the point where she could not take the fear anymore. She's just living her life in just absolute terror. She's like, that's it. I'm not dealing with this anymore. If I'm truly being abducted, take me on board right now. It was after an evening of contact, right? Boom, they pulled her on board and they took her to her quarters. I'm like, whoa, your quarters? I'd had a few people tell me that. Dolly talked about that. She's like, oh yeah, I have this little room they take me to. There's my bed. There's, she's like, there's my hairbrush. I was wondering where that hairbrush was.
That's crazy.
This is what Pat Brown described. It was a very spiritual experience for her. They took her out of her body. They said, this is your masculine side. This is your feminine side. Did you see that dark ring surrounding your planet? Those are negative thought forms from all the fear you guys are putting out. And it was a long, involved experience, but long story short, she ended up quitting her job and becoming a massage therapist and healing people. She's got all these testimonials of people she's healed. She says, Preston, it's the weirdest thing when I'm there doing my healing work. Blue light comes out of my hands and I can see the grays in my mind's eye working on their little knobs and panels to facilitate the healing. And, and her case is not unique. Another lady told me the same thing. So I'm like, can I get a healing? I'd like to try that. She says, sure. And she was doing that healing. I kept seeing these pastel lights coming out of her hands. I'm thinking, what's going on? Finally, I told her, I'm like, I'd swear I see this pastel green light coming out of her hands. And she smiled and she says, oh, you see it. Some people can, some people can't. And another lady, she, because if they claim these abilities, I'm like, let's do it. I want to try it. She was able to run energy through my legs and it felt like, honest to God, electricity going right up through my body. Made my whole body go, I'm like, whoa, I feel that. that is amazing. I mean, I could physically feel the energy coming out of her hands.
Right.
I wouldn't say I'm a super sensitive guy to that sort of thing, but poof, I felt that for sure.
And who knows what possibilities the human mind, the human body is capable of, and we're still discovering that. I mean, some people that have the more of a religious inclination, they're able to do some stuff sometimes in the name of the religion that is amazing. I think it's just because of the meditation and the practice that they put into it. When I see the monks do their fighting stuff, or being able to stand on what looks like a pencil, for hours on end, and just seem content, that is amazing. Like our species is capable of amazing things. But like you mentioned, there's a lot of negative energy out there. There's, between COVID, the political pull right now in the States, and what's happening in Ukraine and Russia. I mean, it's let's just face it, 2022 hasn't been that great. But yeah, I'm starting to believe a lot more into, the possibilities of the human mind, the human body, and all that jazz that comes with it. Louis, do you have any final questions to ask our guest today?
No, I just want to extend a really warm welcome and thanks to Preston Dennett for being on our show. It's super cool to talk about these topics with you, and you need somebody who's equally open-minded to sort of toss these things around. If you have it, like you said, if people are skeptics and say, no, there's no such thing, don't talk to me about it, that's all you're going to see, right? So it's amazing to have like-minded people on our show, and to have an educated discussion about something nobody fully knows about, and that's a difficult thing. You mentioned the spiritual aspect. They say never discuss religion and politics with your friends. Well, everything we discuss dives into both of those realms somehow. So it's tough to ride that line and stay open-minded, but you've done that for 35 years, and you're welcome. A really strong mind to the field, and we need people like you to keep going. So keep doing what you're doing. We appreciate you, and we'd love to have you back again sometime.
Absolutely. Yeah,
that'd be great. I'm going to send you guys the book Symmetry, because I think
let's do it. Let's do it.
And if you want, I can put you in touch with Dolly, because she does have a lot to say about this phenomena.
Absolutely.
Anybody who's legitimate, we would love to have a chat with, and further everybody's knowledge on what is potentially possible. So thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on the show. I really appreciate it. I think this is an important subject. I know people are skeptical, but they'll find out soon enough, because it's real.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. Preston Dennett, thank you so much for being our guest today.
Hey, my pleasure. Thank you.